it's Lark Sprint 3 that we're reviewing today. And this sprint was a full 2-week sprint that was going on at the same time as the Starlight sprint for to try to get Santa Barbara deployed into production. So we did have some resourcing that went more towards the Starlight side, but we did get a lot accomplished in this sprint. The 3 main areas that I think we took a look at was deployment, documentation, and then some API search and batch. So from the deployment end of things, we sketched some deployment plans for staging, deploying into the existing Kubernetes cluster via Rancher, and then provisioning local and AWS EKS clusters in Santa Barbara. I don't know anything about that part, so I can only talk about the Rancher and the Kubernetes. Sorry. I'm sure if you have any questions about that, Tom can probably step in and help. And then in the documentation, we had API documentation and then data modeling documentation. We created a landing area in Jekyll, just basically where we're going to put all the data model stuff. And then the API documentation was for get and post cases. The API was search, and we documented the JSON and HTTP actions. And then we prepared the initial UCSD test data for a batch ingest. Those were the things that we were working on during the sprint. We did have a few blockers. The one was the open source licensing for GitLab. We had some problems getting that through. We're still working through that. And because of those problems, at least we think it's because of those problems, we had some slowness pushing stuff and getting stuff through merge requests. GitLab did go down a couple of times, and we are taking a look at the GitLab runners that we're using and seeing if we can't use our own Rancher cluster and our own Rancher and our own cluster to maybe resolve those problems. Other than that, I felt like that we definitely breezed through a lot of tickets this time. We are working out some kinks with deployment. I think what we're seeing is that we're racing through a lot of tickets and then not deploying nearly as often as we should. We discussed this in the retro yesterday, and I think the team has come to some agreement about how we can do some deployments, maybe delegating that activity to more of the team so that we can deploy more often. Tom, do you want to show off anything?
Yeah, so I've got a few things to show off. The first thing that we should do, well, I'll screen share first. That makes good sense, right? So I think the first thing to do is to show this data model documentation site that came up. So this is the static site that was mentioned. The work that happened this time was mainly just to bootstrap the site itself and to get it in place on, it's at surfliner.gitlab.io/docs. And you can see it's mostly just static content from the Jekyll install right now. And there will be some work ongoing to get the Lark data model documentation up there. A bunch of other work happened around documentation this time around, so I'm going to go ahead and just show the README stuff that did happen. Oh, this is the product-wide README or project-wide README. So yeah, so we did some work to document and normalize the APIs as they exist now. So mainly that's around these 3 actions: HTTP GET, POST for create, and PUT for update, as well as batch. So documentation got in for those, and some normalization of the behavior coming in through that process. So with that in, I think it's probably worth, because I think the last time we demoed this, we just did create with no real data, and then fetch, and I think there's some more to show since then. So I'm going to go ahead And oh, I'm going to go ahead and I've got a server running locally, and I'm going to create myself a new object if I can find some good data to post here. Oh, goodness. Yeah, so this looks like it should work. So I'm going to, okay, so we're going to create a new authority, concept authority with a pref label Moomin. Oh, and I seem to have knocked my server down. I'm going to go ahead and stand it right back up. One more go. Okay, so we've got a response. It says the preferred label is Moomin. We should be able to add data for any of the following fields. We have some model updates to push through next sprint, but we have tests in place that cover all the data that you see in the response there. So that's good. And if I do send a request for this, then I get back the data faithfully. And let's see, the next thing that we should do is a batch. Go ahead and just okay, so this would work over many records, but we'll just do the one for now. So we have a batch endpoint that my Zoom is covering up. So we have a batch edit endpoint and a data structure that we can send to it to run a batch update. In this case, we'll just update the preferred label for the object that we just created. So that's a no response, which is correct. And if we get it again, we should get Moomin updated. We can also do update for individual records with put. I'm not sure that I have a data ready for that right now. I think the put documentation is in PR form right now. So we have batch. I think that my server configuration locally isn't going to work for search, so I won't demo that. But I will say that we got known item search in place for preferred labels and alt labels. So you should be able to run a search through the system and find the objects that the authorities that match a known label at this point. The other major thing to call out here is that I was really, really hoping that this demo would be running from production infrastructure, so I wouldn't have to say things like, I don't think my development environment's set up for search right now. And we're very, very close to that. So to revisit some of what Jessica said, we've built a plan for the staging infrastructure, which includes deploying staging to an existing Kubernetes cluster at UCSD. And that's through Rancher and Helm. And then we're in the process of provisioning Rancher and two Kubernetes clusters at UCSB, one on-prem and one in AWS through EKS. which is their Kubernetes service offering. And the plan is that we should be able to deploy staging to both of those using the same Helm charts, and those charts are in process and I'm really hoping will be merged today. I was kind of crossing my fingers that I could get it done enough to deploy this morning, and it didn't happen. So that's I'm thinking that we're going to wrap that up. If not under the wire for this sprint, then certainly very early in the next one. And I'm going to stop my screen share.
Tom, I thought that was a great wrap up of that. I don't think that there's much more to add except for to talk a little bit about what we're going to concentrate on in the next sprint. The next sprint, the things that we're going to be concentrating on are some solar adapter ID warnings that we're getting, and we're going to work on some expanded labels. But a lot of it is what we're going to be discussing. So our next sprint, we're definitely going to be concentrating on some data model versioning and then the preliminary requirements for the ID service and minting, because that is going to give us, I think, some tickets in order to kind of shape where the product is going next, and we need to have those discussions first. So I do think that's am I leaving anything out of that, Tom? I don't think so.
I can't think of anything, no.
Okay. That's where we're going to be focusing our next sprint, unless this review, somebody tells us they don't think we're going in the right direction. But I think this is where we're heading. All of our stakeholders seem to be pushing us in this direction. So I think that's where we're going to go. I think we take any questions if anybody has any. Do a little dance. All right. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for attending. And if you have any questions after this review, we'll post all the meeting notes in the blog, and we'll put a recording of this up. And if anybody has any questions, please let me know. Okay. All right, great. Thank you, everybody. Long show. I think you can stop the recording.